This video has been produced in response to questions raised by many U3As about how to organise and run hybrid meetings. It is entitled Alternative Ways of Meeting, in recognition of the reality that although our main concerns at present may have a technological focus, there are many different ways of maintaining contact with and meeting with others. The content of this video has been used to run workshops in various parts of the country with different groups of U3As. Within the video, thought is given to the variety of U3A meetings. They differ so much in type, location, size and purpose, and lend themselves to different potential solutions. Solutions for alternative ways of meeting include those using virtually no technology, low-tech and high-tech. In looking at the way ahead, we can learn from our experiences of 2020 and how we have done things differently during the pandemic, used different resources, networked with other U3As to share resources, and experimented with holding different types of meeting online and offline. In thinking ahead, we need above all to start with who we are as people, why we want to meet, and how we might meet our objectives most effectively, remembering the three words the U3A has at its heart: learn, laugh, live. To start with, what do we think of when we hear the word hybrid? It may excite us. We perhaps think of different types of hybrid plants and the flowers, fruit and vegetables we enjoy as a result of hybridisation. But it may be a concept that worries us. We may have dystopian images of different types of monster and of all the things that can go wrong when contrasting elements are combined. Fortunately, the second image is computer generated, but I suspect most of us would not know what to think if we encountered a creature with the body of a polar bear and the head of a penguin. Fortunately, when we talk about hybrid meetings, we are not creating something totally new, but we're combining different methods of meeting in different ways as required to meet our current purposes. Our meetings have always varied in their style and purpose. For many U3A members, the monthly meeting with a speaker and the opportunity to chat with our friends over a cup of coffee is what the U3A is all about. For others, it's the smaller meeting focusing on a shared interest that is central. Some meetings have a specific purpose and are necessary for us to function. The AGM in particular has specific requirements, and last summer a number of presentations were made of how software such as Zoom might be used to run a virtual AGM, and a video is available on the U3A website. Not only do meetings vary in size and purpose, but also in location. Sometimes a large public hall, sometimes a small room in a building open to the public, sometimes somebody's living room or their kitchen, and quite possibly the great outdoors. U3A members want to meet each other and have found innovative ways of doing so. Many cannot wait to be able to meet again face to face, but many have concerns about whether the meetings can ever be the same again, and some may even prefer using electronic devices. They can see and hear better. It can feel safer to stay at home. As individuals, we are all different. While some have embraced technology, others have been excluded, lacking appropriate equipment or internet access, or perhaps unable to meet the costs involved, or frightened by technology. So just a reminder, in meeting together, our aim is to be inclusive, to learn, laugh and live, and to engage with each other in ways that are appropriate for all. Inevitably, this presents challenges, but the past year has demonstrated we're up for a challenge and that we're ready to learn to do things differently. Before turning our attention to new tech, let's not forget old technologies, some of which we no longer even recognise as technology at all. A telephone call for a social chat over a coffee or a glass of something. A card or letter handwritten to remind somebody we're thinking of them. pen and paper for a group activity. For example, a writing group where each member writes a paragraph of a short story before passing the manuscript on to the next member of the group. I'm sure we can all think of lots of examples of how we used to communicate before we had computers and other devices in our homes. And let's not forget that many of these things that we did and perhaps still regard as being in the past are still relevant when we're thinking about how we want to meet in the future. When we're talking of alternative ways of meeting, today we're almost always thinking of how we can use new tech, electronic communication involving video conferencing software. But new tech creates its own challenges even before we think about meetings. The vast range of different types and model of device, from phones to tablets to computers, means very few people can claim to know how they all work. Even devices of the same type from the same manufacturer vary if they're perhaps an older model or if the software hasn't been updated. Although many of the applications we use are designed for use on different devices, the way they appear on our screens may be different. Controls for our video conferencing app may be in a different place on a different type of tablet. Although this video should appear the same on all devices when presented live using Zoom or other video conferencing software, I have no guarantee everyone will see what I expect them to see. What this means is I can show you a number of scenarios and discuss how people might be able to participate at a distance and in person, and I can indicate what equipment might be useful and helpful, but I cannot deal with every scenario and eventuality in detail. My aim is to focus on what you can do with the equipment you already have and to comment on possible additional purchases, preferably without spending a fortune. So just to state the obvious, large meetings are more demanding than small meetings. More things are happening in a large meeting. There's a larger number of people that need to be able to see and hear what is going on. Outdoor meetings are more demanding than indoor meetings. In the main, sound is a problem, and it may be that there's no Wi-Fi availability. So let's turn first to small meetings. Keeping in mind much of what I say here applies also to larger meetings with a few adaptations. And do remember that COVID rules must be taken into account, and that might limit what it's possible to do by way of a different form of meeting. When I think of a small meeting, I think of a group of up to about a dozen people. A group that would normally meet perhaps in a small room in a community building, or perhaps sometimes in somebody's house, or possibly in public space, such as a pub, or out of doors. So thinking firstly of the simplest scenario, a static group in a meeting room or home. In this scenario, some group members would be in the same space, and others would join the meeting using Zoom or other video conferencing software. In the room where the main meeting is taking place, it will be essential to have an appropriate device to host the Zoom meeting. It is advisable to also have a second device, possibly a mobile phone, which can be set up to show those outside the room a view of all those present in the room. And such a device would be mounted perhaps on a tripod, perhaps on a pile of books, or some other stable surface. It might be useful to use an additional microphone. This would augment the sound quality from the room to those outside the room. But only one mic and one audio source should be switched on within the room, and the microphone should be muted when not actively being used to avoid feedback. If using just one device, it's still advisable for a second device to be logged in but muted, A member of the group would be responsible for monitoring chat and whether those outside the meeting wanted to speak, so they can be included in the meeting. It's very easy, once you get a group of people in a room, to forget that there's other people who are participating in the meeting but are sitting at the end of a computer link. In any meeting which is using technology, it's a good idea before the meeting to check the video and audio settings to ensure that the correct microphone and camera are active. And this means making yourself familiar with screen sharing and with the settings menus that are available within your video conferencing application. It's also a good idea to consider switching on live captioning. Although this facility is not as yet available on the free version of Zoom, it is available in the paid-for version, and I understand it's also available on many other video conferencing platforms. Essentially, in this scenario, with people in a room and 2 or 3 people joining from outside, one is holding what is a fairly normal Zoom meeting, where we might see couples sitting together and sharing a camera, but in this case it would be a larger group of people in the main room sharing with smaller numbers of people beyond. But small groups don't only take place in rooms, they take place outside. And it's quite possible that a walking group, for example, might wish to keep in touch with people who are not on the walk, but for one reason or another are at home, or to keep in touch with a second group doing the same walk but at a distance. In this instance, it might be that video conferencing software could be used either directly using the conferencing software or by streaming to Facebook or YouTube, so that messages could be passed to the second group or from the second group to the first group. And these would be visual messages that could be streamed to Facebook or YouTube. If it's simply a telephone call, the mobile phone will work without needing to bother with the video conferencing software. There are notes on the Zoom website on how to stream to both Facebook and to YouTube, but I do urge you to practice first and to give plenty of time for the settings to be set up by the service providers. I found that I could set up a Facebook link very, very easily and quickly, but YouTube has proved much more tricky. For those who think they may be wanting to use software outside, there is a test recording at the end of this video where a colleague has put together some test recordings using a very inexpensive mic. I think it cost about £11, which shows what can be done without spending a lot of money on recording equipment. But not all our meetings are small. We also have meetings which might be described as medium-sized. It might be 30 or so people who've met together, perhaps in a public building such as a community centre or a church. And don't forget, many places of worship have equipped their buildings to stream services and are happy for them to be used for other community purposes. These meetings may be a different type of interest group. Some may have a speaker and some may be sharing in an activity together. Craft groups, dance, exercise classes, music making, choirs, all of them will put different demands, but all of them potentially can be run using video conferencing software to connect those in the room and those engaging with the activity from outside. Speaker-led meetings have similar requirements to large meetings, and I'll discuss that with the next slide. And here I'll focus on activity groups. It's very likely that over the past months, many craft groups and groups involving physical activities and music making have found ways of continuing to meet as a group despite the restrictions placed on us by the pandemic. For craft groups and those involving physical activities, many have used a video camera, sometimes a second camera, to show techniques, steps, body movements, etc. And this method of sharing information and learning can be used not only when none of us can meet together, but when some are meeting together and some are meeting at a distance. So, for example, in a craft group where a skill is being demonstrated, it's quite possible for a group around the demonstrator, suitably socially distanced of course, while others see the close-up of what the demonstrator is doing because of the camera showing the work being undertaken. In an activity group, it may be that a wide-angle camera set up at one end of the room can show those outside the room the activity taking place and engaged in by all the members, and the same camera focused on the group leader may show the detail of the steps or the exercise to be undertaken. As with a small group, it's essential to check out how the different devices are actually attached to each other to make sure the system works. In general, these things are not difficult to do, and it's very easy once you check the share screen menus in an application such as Zoom to see how you can be using a second or alternative camera. In the settings for video and for sound, you're able to choose the input and output devices. That's the device which you hear through and the device that you speak through, so that it's not a case of needing to be a brilliant techie to be able to make these things work, but just getting to know what the different controls do on the software that you're already familiar with. The type of groups that have had some of the biggest challenges during the last few months have been those groups that have been making music, either using instruments or singing together. Depending on the COVID rules, it may be possible in the near future for people to be able to join together to sing and play instruments within the same room. But even if it is possible, it's quite likely that there will be others who are wanting to join in who are not within the main meeting. Where this is the case, it's basically applying the same rules that have been applied during COVID for people joining in from outside, hearing the soundtrack from the room, but muting themselves in order to join in and play or sing alongside. The large meeting is the one which causes most concern to most people, but arguably it's the most straightforward type of meeting to set up as a hybrid or alternative form of meeting. If the large meeting being planned is an AGM, I'd refer you to the video made last summer exploring how AGMs might be run using Zoom. This video is available on the U3A website. The main issue with large meetings is ensuring that the speaker and their presentation can be seen from both inside and outside the room. Most large rooms used for meetings of perhaps 100 plus people are already equipped with audiovisual equipment, or U3As take their own audiovisual equipment with them to these meetings. And although it may seem counterintuitive, if the aim is to be able to see the speaker and their presentation from both inside and outside the room, the simplest way to achieve this is for the presenter, whether in the room or presenting from a distance, to present using video conferencing software. The laptop, which is being used for the presentation, whether it is being used at a distance or used live, can be plugged into the existing AV system in the building. So that if the speaker is in the room, their slides would be seen on the screen. If the speaker is not in the room, their slides presented through screen sharing in the video conferencing software would be shown on the screen in the room through the AV system. If taking this approach, perhaps the biggest potential issue is feedback from loudspeakers in the room. If these are correctly positioned, this should not be an issue. And we all know that it's quite possible to use an AV system with a unidirectional mic, and that helps to avoid any feedback from the microphone into the room. And most U3As that are using audiovisual software will have somebody on the team who understands how to set up the AV system so as to avoid feedback and other problems. Now, a problem can be that when the audience wants to ask questions, there may be a problem in hearing those questions. But if the question is heard by the chair of the meeting or the speaker, they can repeat the question so that everybody in the meeting and listening from outside can hear. And similarly, if there are questions coming from outside of the meeting, these can be put into the chat box on the video conferencing software, picked up by the chair or whoever is monitoring the chat, and repeated to the meeting so that everybody hears the question and hears the response to the question. What is probably already clear is that in a large meeting, and in fact in probably most smaller meetings as well, it's necessary to have somebody who is taking responsibility for the housekeeping. And by that I mean keeping an eye on the chat box, ensuring that people outside the meeting are brought into the meeting, and that both those inside the meeting and those beyond the meeting are able to participate fully. The larger the meeting, the more important it is to have a rehearsal. A rehearsal enables those who are looking after the tech to make any adjustments that are necessary. For many people, a highlight of large meetings is often the opportunity to meet friends. This is challenging because of the background noise that is going to be evident in almost any venue. But it may be possible in some venues to make use of breakout rooms for mixing and socialising. If there is a small room available, this could be set up as a breakout room using a separate laptop or phone, and those outside the room could join in with those in this room in the same way as in any breakout room scenario. Inevitably, there are problem areas. We're doing something new, we're doing something different, and hopefully we'll be able to find ways of sharing our experiences. The first problem area is that there's no Wi-Fi in the building, or other building users are hogging all the bandwidth. Probably the simplest solutions in this instance are either to use a smartphone as a hotspot or to use a USB dongle or MiFi system. These enable you to set up your own wireless facility within the room. It is essential, if you're wanting to do this, that it should be possible to link into a 3G or a 4G signal. It's difficult to say what data allowance will actually be necessary, but I would suggest that if you allow for the use of 2 to 3 gigabits of data per hour, but in practice it's more likely to be half or less, depending on what kind of data is being broadcast. Again, this is one of those things which needs experimentation and the results of using hotspots to be shared so that people can make sure that they have got a sufficient data allowance if they're wanting to set up their own hotspot. As I've already said, sound can be an issue, particularly if you're wanting to communicate any kind of social intermingling. In larger meetings or meetings held outside, an additional microphone can be useful and sometimes is essential. But microphones do not need to be expensive, but where possible, seek expert advice or try out 1 or 2 microphones before making a purchase. The clip that's appended to this video shows what can be achieved with an inexpensive microphone and a smartphone, but clearly that may not be the most appropriate way to communicate in all situations. So additional mics compatible with the equipment that you've got, and making sure that only one microphone is switched on at a time and only one sound output is heard at a time. And then there's the problem, the visuals. We're all used to seeing images of ourselves now in different groups on video conferencing software. But if we're trying to include more people in a larger room, the first thing to look at is using a tripod. And a tripod or some other safe, secure support is essential in order to avoid camera wobble and making an audience seasick. Tripods can be bought very inexpensively. It doesn't need a big, cumbersome tripod, though it's quite likely that you'll find there are members of the U3A that have got tripods that they're more than willing to make available. The crucial thing is that there's an appropriate fitting on the top of the tripod to hold the second camera, the mobile phone, or whatever other device is being used to provide you with the additional camera facility. And I would strongly recommend trying out a mobile phone as a camera before spending a lot of money on additional equipment. There are many webcams available, and if you look at any website which sells these kinds of product, you'll find that you can find cameras that cost £10 and cameras that cost £100 and cameras that cost much more. Think about what you're going to be using the camera for before purchasing. At a meeting I was at recently, somebody was showing off the webcam that they'd bought with a zoom lens and a microphone at a cost of about £100. If you're going to get the use out of it, and if it can be shared by a number of groups, such a purchase is probably a good thing. It's no bad idea to consider such a purchase. What I've said has really taken us on a fairly rapid trip through what might or might not be possible. I haven't gone into the detail of what you plug into what to make this or that or the other happen. There's plenty of information about this on the internet, and if you've got somebody who's into tech in your U3A, they almost certainly will enjoy playing with the toys until they get something to work. But if you're wanting to look for sources of additional information, this web page, which has been produced by a colleague, John Hunt, is invaluable in pointing you at information sources and giving some examples of what can be done in practice. Clearly, we're all on a learning curve. If we were in a workshop now, at this point we would move into a question and answer and discussion session. But we're not in a workshop, this is a video. What I would encourage people to do is to share their experiences with other U3A members from around the country. There are various ways this might be done. One is using the Keeping in Touch Facebook page. Another is using space on a U3A forum on the U3A national website. I would encourage sharing of information, sharing experience of different equipment, sharing what has worked and what hasn't worked, so that we can all learn together and hopefully continue to meet, whether it's in the kind of meetings we were used to in our old normal, or whether it's looking at alternative ways of continuing to meet in whatever the new normal might be once we move out of the pandemic and into some kind of new normality.
Okay, so here I am testing the recording. It's a wonderfully windy day today, 20 miles an hour gusting to 30 in my back garden. and I'm speaking without the microphone. This is just the internal microphone of the smartphone, and I'm speaking here about a foot away. I've now put it on the table and I'm speaking about 3 feet away, so if we were sitting round a table we'd have to be socially distanced, so 3 feet, it could be in the centre, 3 feet away either side. I'll try and step back a bit further, and now I'm 6 feet away, and it'd be interesting to see whether you can pick anything up. I came back again because I just thought of an idea. I'm going to reposition that at 90 degrees, and same test. I'm about a foot away now. I'm going to step back to about 3 feet away now and step back further, and I'm about 6 feet away with that wind direction. So what I'm now going to do is to plug in the lapel microphone. Now I've just plugged that in, and hopefully it's recording from that. It's got this wonderful wind muff on it, so we'll see if it makes any difference. I'm about 3 feet away from the phone, doesn't make any difference. I've got 2 meters of cord, so of course I'm now actually about 6 feet away from the phone, and we'll see if the wind noise is better. I'm just going to walk round to 90 degrees, so having just faced south, I'm now facing east. So that's that. I'm going to take the microphone off now, and I'm going to just put it at the side there. Now again, if we're sitting round a table, we'd be about 3 feet away. So I'm walking round and speaking at it about 3 feet away. The wind's so strong it's actually moving the microphone along, so it's a real test. I'm now about 6 feet away. So that's the end of that test. What I'm now going to do is remove this little sort of muff thing. There we are, and it won't have the wind protection, but it'd be interesting to see what it sounds like. So I'm again using it as the lapel microphone, which is about 6 inches below my chin, but that's without the wind muff on. So I'm walking around a bit now. I'll try and finally, this is the final thing, I'll just take it off and put it flat down on the table, so if there were people sitting around the table speaking about 3 feet away, it'd be interesting to see if it picks this up satisfactorily. Right, that's the end of the test.